Hi guys, this is Allison Nelson, one of your school psychologists with Clark County Public Schools, and I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit today about behavior as we are preparing to embark on this new journey with education. We can continue to remain hopeful and allow ourselves to get a little bit curious about how our school year, the start of our school year, will look. But it's also important for us to be prepared for when things may not go as we hoped or as we planned. Now, we know that we can anticipate that some of our students, some of our children, may experience some difficulty coping with the change or dealing with the transition from being at home during the summer and transitioning into working on schoolwork from the home setting. We can anticipate that there may be feelings of frustration or stress. And we know that these types of feelings can result in some unwanted behaviors or behavioral outbursts. So we're going to talk a little bit about behavior, and we're going to talk about some tips and some tricks that we can use to help our students cope during this time. So what do we know about behavior? We know that all behavior serves a purpose. So this applies to both positive behaviors as well as negative or behaviors that are not desirable. In a very general sense, you can break up the function of behavior into two different categories. So you can typically look at behavior as a means to get something that somebody wants or somebody needs. You can also look at behavior as a way to avoid something. So again, this refers to both positive and negative behaviors. And this gives us an understanding that behavior is actually serving as a means of communication. So we can start to look at behavior as a way for our children or our students to tell us about something that they need. We also know that thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are all interrelated. So you can think of them in kind of a cyclical pattern. So you have thoughts that spur feelings. These feelings result in reactions or behaviors. The behaviors then themselves impact future thoughts. So you can see how it is a cycle. It's a circle. We also know that behavioral outbursts may be the result of an autonomic stress response. So what this means is that there has been a trigger or an event that the individual perceives as being threatening in some way. And their limbic system of their brain takes over. And this is the part of the brain that is responsible for survival. This is where your fight, flight, or freeze response lives. So these are physiological happenings within the brain and the body that are beyond the individual's control. We also know that triggering events can occur outside of the individual, so they could be external triggers, but they can also occur within the individual. So this may be things like thoughts, certain physical sensations within the body. Now, oftentimes the internal triggers are a little bit more difficult to detect, while the external triggers are a little bit more easier to see. And we'll talk a little bit more about that here in just a moment. So knowing what we know about behavior, what can we do to support our students whenever they are learning in the classroom, working on academic work from home? One of the most helpful things that we could do is to begin to recognize triggers and associated responses. So you can think about it as though you're putting on your detective hat, you've got your little magnifying glass out, and you're really trying to notice patterns of responses to particular events. this will help you to identify certain triggers, and you can also work with the student to develop coping skills that are related to things that may be specifically triggering to them. Another thing that we can do to support our students is to utilize de-escalation strategies. And we want to utilize de-escalation strategies appropriately and in a timely manner. And I'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. And then finally, as I had mentioned earlier, we need to help our students and our children develop coping skills. So these are things that will require some direct instruction and guidance with the student. It's also important for us to know that different coping skills work for different people, and different coping skills may work better in certain situations than others. So there can be some trial and error involved with learning and establishing coping skills that work for the individual and their related responses. And I'll get into a little bit more detail about some coping skills, particularly mindfulness, that we can use with our kiddos whenever they become escalated. Now, this is a graphic of the escalation cycle. So you'll see that there are, it almost looks like a mountain. And you have here at the very start, so this is where the individual is calm. They are at homeostasis here. A trigger occurs. They begin to get agitated. Things accelerate. Eventually, they may come up here to the very peak. So this is where we're in that autonomic stress response. And eventually, we know that that all behavior is temporary. Eventually, the individual, even without any type of intervention, would at some point begin to de-escalate and finally return to a state of recovery. But we can intervene at certain points during this cycle. So it is totally appropriate to intervene and use some of these de-escalation strategies, or prompt the student to use some coping skills that they know and practice regularly at this point here, and then over here as they are coming back down. You'll notice up here we do not have an arrow that indicates intervention is appropriate. That is because when we are working from our limbic system, we are not able to reason or use logic. So this is a time where you want to avoid any type of corrective actions, any type of redirections. At this point in time, the best thing that you can do as an adult, as a trusted adult for the child, is to make an effort to create some connection with the student. So this could be done through many different strategies: grounding strategies, breathing strategies. So we just know at this point in time we want to avoid any type of corrective action or redirection. Now, this graphic right here provides a visual of how our behavior impacts other people's behavior. So it's like a little infinity loop, and really it could go in any type of direction. So we'll just say here we have the student's behavior. The student is becoming escalated, and then that then impacts us, and we start to have certain thoughts or feelings about the student's behavior, which impacts our behavior. And then that impacts the student's thoughts and feelings, and so on and so forth. So it's important for us, as we intervene with individuals who may be experiencing some behavioral outbursts or escalation, that we also try to maintain a sense of calm. So whenever we approach individuals who may be having some behavioral difficulties, it's important that we take a step back, we take a couple big deep breaths ourselves, and we enter the situation with a sense of calm. So again, we are working from a place of reason and logic rather than a place of fear or worry or threat. So mindfulness is a very universal tool that can be used to help individuals really maintain a sense of calm, and it can also help us to de-escalate whenever we become escalated. So there are some really important components to mindfulness that we need to think about as we might consider using these as a tool. So mindfulness is essentially paying attention in a particular way on purpose in the present moment and non-judgmentally. It is important that we practice mindfulness consistently. So in order for it to be effective or impactful in events where we are upset or the student is upset, it needs to be easily accessed. And the way that we create easy access is by frequent practice. So in order for it to be useful when we are in distress, we have to engage in these practices regularly. And you can use mindfulness in so many different ways. It is so accessible for every person. And it doesn't have to be an extended practice that you have every day. It could be little short bits, 5 minutes here and there throughout the course of your day. And that will have a massive impact on the way that your brain and your body are communicating. Non-judgment and acceptance. So whenever we practice mindfulness, we are allowing ourselves to be an observer of our internal workings, of our external world, and we are observing with a sense of non-judgment and acceptance. This helps us to respond instead of react. So it allows us to deal with our circumstances in a very responsive manner. Also, curiosity. So in practicing mindfulness, we are engaging a sense of curiosity that promotes optimism and wonder and really sets the stage for us to be able to learn from our experiences. So how can we practice mindfulness? One of the most foundational mindfulness practice would be mindful breathing. So this is something that both adults and young children are capable of learning and practicing regularly. And there are so many different resources out there that you can access. There are different apps that you can put onto your phone. Insight Timer and Calm are two of my favorites. And they are apps that have options for both adults and children, which is really great. We also have some local homegrown resources. So through the Bee Project, we have a curriculum that has certain lessons on mindful breathing. You can locate that on the Clark County Public Schools website. And we also have a YouTube channel where you and your student could watch videos together of various mindfulness practices, some of which are breathing and some of which are some of the other practices that I will talk about. You can also engage in body scan or awareness activities. So this would allow the student, the individual, to really have a grounding experience within their body and within the present moment, which helps to create a sense of calm. Mindful movement, so you could use yoga or you could use any other type of movement to practice mindfulness as well. And then another great one, especially for young children and adults as well, is the use of positive affirmations. So these are just very short sayings that are repeated. They could be repeated mentally or repeated out loud, and that establish a sense of positivity and confidence. So especially if a student might be having a difficult time grasping a new concept academically, maybe they choose the affirmation of, I can do hard things. So that's just an example. So again, all of these things are ways that you can create connection with an individual when they may be becoming escalated, but it's also important for us to know that in order for these to be impactful, it is very helpful for us to practice them on a regular basis and make them a part of our daily habits.